Why I Joined is what this is titled. In 1984, my father, decided to leave his entire family and way of life. And he, as many others, men, women, children, fathers, daughters, sons, etc., made the immense thought process to come to the U.S. para buscarle a la vida. The phrase buscarle a la vida is something my dad mentioned to me a week ago. The literal translation means looking for life. I know my father and many other folks came to a point in their lives where they either were in the most unfavorable conditions within their homeland, they were somehow enticed by the heavenly vague catchphrase, American dream, faced the devastating effects of war and other forms of persecution, pushing them into becoming refugees. His statement, however, to look for life, translated to me that part of his accepted reality as a 15-year-old boy in the 1980s would somehow be better if he were in the States. His journey culminated on deciding to cross the U.S.-Mexico border on July 4th of all days, Independence Day of 1984. I guess he thought maybe there'd be less patrols that day. The train was and still is a very enticing mode of transportation for coming here, and thousands have done so. Equally, thousands have died attempting to, and more recently, thousands have been detained and put into for-profit prisons with our taxpayer dollars. I would not be an idea until early 1994, and sometimes thinking about my age startles me when I begin to contextualize my entire life around what the empire has been doing within my personal lifespan. I'm 21 years old, and the empire has brought death, displacement, starvation, migration, war, and genocide to millions of people around the world. And parts of me was clueless to these disturbing facts for most of my life. When I moved from my little dairy agricultural prison town to the huge cities of Southern California, I became quickly immersed into the fast-paced, mass traffic, millions of people environment. I imagined myself as my dad did, leaving my nuclear family to look for life. I took a Vietnam War and a War on Terror class in my second year in college, and these two classes, they provided viewpoints that put the empire of the U.S. into a perspective of how a drive for profits would supersede any attempts to provide justification for genocidal wars of aggression. I saw images of U.S. soldiers' necklaces ringed with ears of humans they had murdered in combat in Vietnam. I saw children crying, hiding, and running from mass bombing campaigns of Fallujah. I learned of the 500,000 children that were slowly killed by genocidal sanctions on Iraq during the 90s, and how Albright disgustingly mentioned the price was worth it. In my lifetime, the U.S. empire domestically has been increasing profits of the ruling class while equally extracting more hours of labor, sweat, blood, tears from the U.S. working class. It just didn't make sense in my head. How could this small amount of people be getting wealthier when everyone else was just plummeting deeper and deeper into poverty? Being able to identify these contradictions, learning of wars for profit, or in many cases, to protect profits, even if it meant destroying the livelihoods of millions, pushed me into seeking something to provide some sort of relief where I could fight back. In mid-2015, I came across the Bernie Sanders presidential race, and like millions of others did, I jumped on the train to spread the word. I went into organizing students at my university and saw Bernie speak in LA. I agreed almost on everything he agitated on. However, I came across a PSL organizer who invited me to a forum like this, the one that each of you are sitting in now. This was December of 2015. Those present at my first forum treated me not as a noob, which is this vernacular which I grew up in capitalist America, which has to do with Call of Duty, but anyways, the comrades approached me with patience and discipline, knowing that I was new to political activism, but that this didn't mean that I should be written off or that I didn't have the potential to become a revolutionary Marxist. After coming to several forums, reading Liberation News, the organ of the PSL, watching videos of past demos against the wars of the US that they engaged in abroad, organized by activists and organizers of the PSL and their allies, I became very engaged and began to compare my organizing for Presidential Sanders to the organizing the organizers here were doing with the party and what they had done over the past decades, leaving me with an obvious decision. When I was invited to begin candidate classes, I was shocked because I didn't feel I knew as much history or had the credentials as the cadre did. But they pointed out to me something which I believe many of us here can agree and have in common. To quote George Jackson, promoting consciousness involves the general dissemination of the concept that each of us is part of a universal action and interaction. The system which they are organizing against has oppressed and exploited everyone from Boyle Heights to Yugoslavia to Flint to Fallujah to Dien Bien Phu to Zacatecas to Palestine to Aleppo and to Ambos Nogales. Each of us here has been touched in some instances more directly, as my father did when neoliberalism ravaged the countryside of Mexico, to the indirect instances when my brothers and sisters in Fallujah were bombed day in and day out, while I was probably at school or watching cartoons on TV. These contradictions are the ones which pushed me into joining a revolutionary organization, which not only speaks about theory, but is in the streets practicing and applying theory. To conclude, the PSL is organizing and building a party whose main focus is to train a new generation of revolutionaries. We are the people who will and must overthrow the entire system of capitalism by any means necessary. To begin, we must join a political organization and begin to read about past humans who struggled against the status quo, against the privileged few who collect weekly checks from their mailbox, against the landowning classes who are driven to increase rent to staggering amounts, against the 1% who tosses the lease of the White House from the Dems to the Republicans every 4 years, against the military-industrial complex who with an over $1 trillion budget oppresses our brothers and sisters abroad. They, the board of directors of all the Fortune 100 companies, must be taken out of their positions and their corporations be given to the workers. George Jackson said, quote, "It is organizing the masses around their realistic needs and moving them against whatever forces restrict their passage to power. As my dad said, hay que buscarle a la vida. Although to me that means we should organize around our realistic needs and more collectively against the capitalist system which the U.S. empire upholds. El pueblo unido y organizado vencerá y tomará la trayectoria de nuestras vidas para la paz del mundo entero. The people, organized and united, will take our lives toward peace of the world and to defeat the system."